Hey there, it's Patrick Lovell coming at you at 11:30 a.m. my time on Sunday, March 5th, 2023. And I had to lay out this truth bomb positioning for our fundraising dynamic to purge corruption in the United States, um, concurrent with what I'm calling a presidential campaign to elevate um, the mechanics, the details, the understanding that I have over hundreds and thousands of hours and interviews and everything else that reveals what has been suppressed in the United States and which has a global impact. And really, what's lit me up at this moment was I happened to mention on Twitter yesterday that every time I see Bill Maher's face or something that pops up in my social media feed, I just browse over it now because I've seen enough of him to understand that there's a fog, if you will, that is impenetrable, that does not allow Bill to understand kind of the nuances or the details of the world in which he pontificates all the time, and most of the time incorrectly. I like the guy. I've always liked the guy. I like comedy. I revere his being in the game as long as it has to some degree, but. I mean, it's like disconnected. But the only reason I decided to tune into the Bill Maher program this weekend is because in other social media feeds, I found out that both Bernie Sanders and Russell Brand were on, and I was very curious to what they had to say and how they were going to say it. And I want to start briefly because they both juxtapose exactly what it is that I'm appealing to you to understand what it is that I am trying to do to create a mass upheaval, a populist tidal wave to purge corruption. And both of these gentlemen are somebody that I admire, I appreciate, I've been fans of for some time, but I also understand the details of what they don't understand and what I have to get out now. And I hope that you'll share this with everybody you see, as well as hashtag Bernie Sanders and Russell Brand, because it's absurd, quite frankly, that they are in the position to have national, international audiences, and they're saying the right things without the details, and they don't go far enough because they don't understand how it works. And it's not because they're not incredibly intelligent or capable or have achieved so much throughout their career, particularly Bernie Sanders, but it's just insane what everybody's missing. And I'll finish it up with a conversation I just had with a random person who called me, which demonstrates what I deal with on a weekly basis. So let me address Bernie Sanders first. So Bernie Sanders comes on, and he's promoting a book, and also possibly tapping into something that so many are frustrated with, and you see it all over compositely social media, but a criticism and maybe a hatred and maybe a burning desire to flush out and down the toilet capitalism. And his new book is "It's Okay to Be Angry with Capitalism." Now, meanwhile, Bernie talks about the same things that he's talked about since the 2016 election, and quite frankly, long before that, going back to the Occupy Wall Street movement that I'm aware of, which was in 2011, 2012, right? And, so we're talking about now, again, 13 years to my point about donating $13 to our campaign to create a tidal wave populist movement to purge corruption. But he answers in these sort of like eloquent comparisons of top line statistics that give you a sense that there's this unfair place. And what it appears to me at the moment, at least, the point that he's trying to make above all else, is that you've got to reconfigure the tax code to be able to tax the rich, and that we shouldn't have billionaires. I, for the most part, agree with that, because I do understand tax code. And Bill Maher actually made an interesting point about that we do have a hybrid, in some mechanics, socialist sort of scenarios, and then of course capitalistic free markets and others. And it's a huge country, and it's a huge economy, and it's further through the globe, and there's bits and pieces of each, quite frankly. But it's like we're trying to arrive at this understanding of what exactly the problem is. And what amazes me about Bernie Sanders in the most frustrating way for me are these platitudes. Now, understand who Bernie Sanders is. Bernie Sanders in the 2016 presidential campaign in Brooklyn, in front of the country, was asked about certain things he had said, and one of the most notable comments that he had said at that time period was Wall Street's business model is fraud. I swear to God, I about leapt through my ceiling at that time because I knew where he got that statement from. I had a front row seat to it because at the time, Stephanie Kelton, the head of, quite frankly, or at least PR head of MMT, was an economic advisor to Bernie Sanders' campaign. And because she at that time had come out of the University of Kansas City, Missouri, she was working with a lot of the great minds there, including none other than the guy that showed me the way, a gentleman by the name of William K. Black. And William K. Black, and I got this, in conversations at the time, I understood was going to be named an advisor to Bernie as well. And I was learning all of the things that I learned to ultimately make the con, and it transpired to what Bernie said in front of the world, which was Wall Street's business model is fraud. But during that debate with Hillary Clinton in Brooklyn at that time period, what most people will remember was that was the moment where it became clear that the DNC, the Democratic National Committee, circled the wagons and basically was doing everything it could to purge Bernie. Why? Basically what he just said. Because the Democratic Party gets so much of its funding and its leadership is sort of an amalgamation of Wall Street interest as well as big law, which is connected to Wall Street, and then the rest of the economy, which is connected to Wall Street. And so it was like, nope, you're not going there. Now, of course, that followed the 2008 great financial crisis that led to the fraud closure crisis that led to Occupy Wall Street at the time. And so during that run, it was incredibly important because you would see as that time period progressed that Donald Trump, of all people, began to plagiarize Bernie Sanders. And so he captured the sort of the populist wave, but then he tapped into a white supremacist version of it, and then it took off to all things Trumpism. But my criticism of Bernie Sanders was he never told you exactly what the fraud was, which is control fraud, which is based on Gresham's dynamic, which is based on, all manner, shapes, or forms of predation, and everything that creates the fictional economy that it is that I continue to espouse and to educate and to show you step by step. You can color it like a map of the United States with different colors, and then you put the full picture together, and you'll understand what Bernie meant at that time, that Wall Street's business model of fraud. But there is a huge divide between actually espousing a concept like that and then dovetailing it into universal health care, and that billionaires have too much power and that we've got to tax them, and we've got to all of these things that regular people are unfortunately suffering through, to give them an opportunity to get a better stance in society, to improve the lives of their families, sort of thing. Bernie's going to ultimately take that type of statement and go directly to where we're going to have to kind of reconfigure the tax structure, particularly as it relates to billionaires. Okay, here. But here's the other side of the equation. When you understand how Wall Street's business model is fraud, it's not shenanigans, as of course Hillary Rodham Clinton said at that time period, as she was taking campaign donations from Goldman Sachs. No, fraud is not Animal House and John Belushi and the guys of Delta House basically going to put marbles on Dean Wormer's freaking glory parade, right? It's not shenanigans. Fraud is illegal theft by deception. But in the case of what I continue to be revealing to you, on a mammoth scale, in which our financial system literally became the mafiocracy, because they operated with a complicated control fraud scheme, which we play out in the con at www.thecon.tv, and ultimately based on predation that created a liar's economy, based on liar's loans. There's a reason why banks and CEOs do this. It's called modern executive compensation, and it's what drives their freaking bonuses, which is what drives this so-called capitalistic structure for the shareholders and, of course, of the board, based on short-term profits that are based on fiction. Okay? That's all a house of cards that is built to fail. And it did, which led to, of course, Goldman Sachs and the shorts, which is really, the big short, which Brad Pitt, I thought had in Plan B, did a masterful job with, of course, the glorious screenwriter Adam McKay, but they didn't understand the full story. And they ultimately, in that story, which was a great story, ended up blaming it on the victim. They blamed it on pole dancing, strip dancers that got in over their heads. Well, there's a reason why pole dancing strip dancers could get in over their head, and it's what it is that I'm explaining to you. And ultimately, what The Big Short does in the end, the last 5 minutes of it, is what I've spent the last 12 years putting together for you. And the reason we're not out there and being seen by tens of millions of people, I'm absolutely convinced BlackRock blocked us. And I'm going to come back to that full circle, because Bernie Sanders did say accurately, as did Russell Brand, that, okay, it's a country of, for, and by BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street. Yeah, but how did that happen, guys? What I'm telling you. So, for example, when Bernie talks about Wall Street's business model as fraud, and he doesn't go into details, what's the most amazing thing about that is that it was Bernie Sanders who initiated an investigation in Congress that I believe led to the Bloomberg FOIA request that led to this wonderful journalist, Mark Pittman at the time, that ultimately came up with this understanding of what the Federal Reserve actually did. And the Federal Reserve and the two big to fail banks, which they call the consortium, and that came directly from Roger Cohen, the general counsel and the head partner of Sullivan and Cromwell, during the investigation of the Federal Crisis Inquiry Commission, that he laid out that Federal Reserve Act 13.3 was a freaking sham. And I've proved that, okay? That's first and foremost. But what does that mean? Well, it means that we spent $30+ trillion backdooring when the country didn't understand and when the media didn't understand what exactly took place to be able to make whole these incredible fraud shops that were using a ginormous Ponzi scheme that was part and parcel to the Big Short and everything that came since. And nobody seems to understand because they don't understand who did what and how it was done, which we lay out in the con, which the federal government actually did, but didn't do the right way. Because there's another smoke and mirrors part of this whole thing. The Federal Crisis Inquiry Commission had over 1,000 witnesses. It lasted over a year. I think the total cost of it, which was small compared to what it was involved with, was $11 million. But then ultimately, something along the lines of that. But then ultimately, it was a bipartisan, hack job with, you had, Democrats and Republicans, and everything got mixed up, and then the media didn't know how to cover it. So ultimately, they came up with only 11 criminal referrals, of which the head of that investigation, a gentleman out of California by the name of Phil Angelides, actually thought it was just the beginning. And by the way, Elizabeth Warren, it referenced in the 2016 campaign as, okay, well, if you guys, Republicans, are going to go after Benghazi, then we're going to go after the Federal Crisis Inquiry Commission to show what Wall Street got away with. It was a weird politicking sort of thing that only somebody like Elizabeth Warren could actually navigate because of just the insanity of the politics. But that brings me back to Bernie Sanders, who actually did an investigation with FOIA to find out that led to, Mark Pittman and Bloomberg being able to find out that trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars were backdoored to the financial system, of which Bernie Sanders was learning from William K. Black that Wall Street's business model is fraud. Yes, it was. It was the third act of what started in the S&L crisis back in the late 80s, early 90s. Then it was Act 3 of the GFC, of which it was 180 times bigger than what happened in the savings and loan crisis, where we sent 1,000 high-level executives to prison. Since that time, the parties, the duopoly, worked together with their fundraising fanatics and their allies in the corporate law structure that got rid of regulation. They created deregulation, supervision, and decriminalization that led to basically the Wild West in finance, but it wasn't the Wild West. It was a top-down vertical built on what I'm continuing to reveal to you is the mafiocracy. So ultimately, Bernie Sanders finds out all of this stuff. He has the information. He has the details. He knows how many trillions of dollars were backdoored to an illegal system that the Department of Justice failed to prosecute because that was part and parcel to what the Obama administration decided to do. Because I guess, and what I've heard since then, was that they thought the entire world was going to collapse. So they just made a choice that's like, you got to save the economy. And by saving the economy, they saved the racketeers, the CEOs, the dons of this freaking crime at the top apex of the mafiocracy, which is what everybody's talking about, but they can't see the forest through the trees. So that's the first criticism of Bernie Sanders. The second, of course, is Russell Brand. Russell Brand has got one of the most beautiful, from the heart, soulful, impactful, compelling abilities to be able to use the language, the English language, to brilliantly structure and organize his thoughts in a way that, in my opinion, get to what it is that I'm telling you, but without the details that I'm telling you. And so Russell Brand is sitting there with John Heilemann, who's from the Circus and MSNBC, which was an interesting interaction, but then ultimately, broadcasting to the audience through Bill Maher, that it's like, look, man, the system is corrupt. Everybody answers to the whole thing. The duopoly is corrupt. The corporations like pharmaceuticals and, that led to the opioid addictions and the stuff that we saw in the Sackler, settlements, 140,000 deaths versus, $1 billion fine, and they make out with billions of dollars sort of thing. And then ultimately, he's talking about Bernie Sanders is identifying the situation, and Russell Brand's criticism of what was kind of in the moment is like, we can't, to John Heilemann, who is also on MSNBC, is like, don't act like you live in a glass house and you're throwing bricks at Fox because of all the stuff that, the Dominion lawsuit, which is an important aspect of this and a very important detail to understand when they're not all talking about this. Why was it up to a lawsuit of a corporation to create discovery of what was happening with Rupert Murdoch and Fox, covering up everything that they knew with the January 6th insurrection and proclaiming it was all bullshit internally and then espousing lies? Well, MSNBC, if it was a real news organization, if it was a real journalistic institution, it would have actually gone after that and made those answers known right after the fucking insurrection, quite frankly. They never did. So, I mean, what you need to look at the lay of the land is it's like, there is no journalism. It's just opinion, entertainment, everybody reacting to stuff that they don't understand without the details. And the whole reason we have the law is you have professionals with investigatory powers that can actually get inside whatever the situation is to actually get discovery to put together whatever the freaking prosecution must be. That's not what happened in the aftermath of 2008. Like I said at the outset, we ended up basically circling the wagons and doing this dog and pony show and the smoke and mirrors circus to where we ended up backdooring $30 trillion to the guys that blew up the fucking world. And we've been living in that world ever since, of which Russell Brand is eloquently, above, out of his mind. Like the same thing is happening in the UK with Brexit, and that was the conversation. But ultimately, it's like, Russell, dude, there is an A plus B equals C scenario. It starts with predatory lending. It's based on modern executive compensation through what we call Gresham's dynamic, where bad ethics drives out good ethics in the marketplace, which creates a freaking environment of deception that ultimately basically creates a fictional economy to where the CEOs with all of this power are being able to freaking game the system. And when it blows up, they're the first in line to get the trillions of dollars frickin' from the full faith and credit of the United States that leads to stuff like Bernie Sanders saying, well, look, there's this disparity. But it's not capitalism. Capitalism is the nature of risk-reward. There is no risk here. It's corporate fascism undergirded by a criminal syndicate that gives trillions and trillions of dollars to the system that's in control. If you looked at Saturday Night Live last night, there's elements that talk about this. And by the way, Travis Kelce did a masterful job last night. You listen to everything Russell Brand says. You listen to Joe Rogan. Russell Brand are saying what I'm saying, but just in platitudes without the details. And the details is what puts people in prison so that you have a system that can have the integrity of law and the structure that we have a government of, by, and for the people, but the people have to be engaged in, they have to have an understanding of who did what, when, and how, which is the facts. And media has destroyed that. All of media is a shit show like what Russell Brand described. Every night I watch Alex Wagner or CNN or, Fox, and all of these guys basically espouse high school fucking depictions. It's like, who's popular? That has nothing to do with the fourth estate and journalism on behalf of protecting the people from corruption, which is the way it was designed. That's why we call it the fourth estate. And I'm losing my mind because it's like I'm trying to penetrate. And what I've been doing is I created this fundraising scenario to where I'm asking each and every one of you to donate $13 to purge corruption. If I can get 1,300 people to donate $13, which is you're going to spend today, in whatever manner, shape, or form, and you have to buy into your democracy. I'm running for president to elevate this revelation of this information that I have, that as a producer, I could create, if we had the right funds. The first compilation of 1,300 people donating $13 is to get us on the map to basically create, an organization. Once you can get to that point, I think we could build it to 130,000, contributors and to, maybe eventually 13 million contributors, which would give us $169 million. And if I had to sell $169 million in this campaign, I would create a barnstorming tour where I would present everything that BlackRock, which going back to the beginning of this truth bomb, Bernie Sanders said it's the nation, and so did, quite frankly, Russell Brand. That, hey, what's the story with, BlackRock and Vanguard and State Street having as much power as they did? Well, I'll tell you how. So when I'm talking about Federal Reserve Act 13.3, what Timothy Geithner former president of the New York Fed, who was supposed to regulate all the stuff that blew up the world in 2006, 7, 8, ultimately becomes under Obama. He becomes the Treasury Secretary, of which he's playing this shell game to make sure nobody knows what it is that I'm revealing to you now. And then ultimately they added quantitative easing to the mix, by the way, which is a whole other side of the story. And then ultimately, Geithner and the company, I was talking about Federal Reserve Act 13.3. Oh yeah, BlackRock. But Geithner basically directed Larry Fink and the CEO of BlackRock to administer the funds under Maiden Lane to create the backstop for then it was oh my God, what the hell is wrong with me? Bear Stearns. Bear Stearns was the first to fall. And then ultimately, Maiden Lane was picked up because of Federal Reserve Act 13.3 that got the consortium with the banks to basically save Bear Stearns to try to prevent contagion. But the contagion came with the fall of Lehman, and then ultimately led to all of the stuff that I'm revealing to you. But it was Bear Stearns. It was BlackRock and Larry Fink that became the administrators of this emergency recovery, which is incredible because Larry Fink was involved with the Resolution Trust that goes back to the S&L crisis, and then he created this what was it, Aladdin software that basically gets all the information in front of everybody, and that's where he had value. But he was also deeply involved with mortgage-backed securities with this guy Stephen Schwarzman and Blackstone, throughout the time period of like the late 90s to the actual nuclear fallout of the 2008 great financial crisis. And then he's there to hoover it up and then choose how we're going to rework the world, which is what he did, which is why now they've got $9 trillion under asset. Okay, the government, who voted for Larry Fink to be the ruler of the world? I didn't. Did you, Russell? Did you, Bernie? Of course we didn't. But neither of you are telling everybody how this whole thing happened. I have the answers, and not only on top of that, I've got the answers. We had 16 million filed foreclosures. I know that if you're listening to this, either you or somebody you know or somebody that your family were involved with this. And that, the numbers are spectacular. We're talking at least 50 million people devastated by this just in the housing side. That doesn't include the collapse of the pensions that were bet against this. And then, of course, the municipalities and the states and all of the rest of it that went by the wayside. I know that we had at some point, I think it was like 12 to 15% unemployment. Huge numbers, second only to the Great Depression. And then ultimately, we kind of piecemeal it back. We didn't have a recovery for 10 years. And then suddenly, all of a sudden, COVID happens. And then what do we see? We saw this next phase, which is the same thing. It's the second first, same as the first, involving the Federal Reserve, and all of the money went to the top 1% so that they could buy all of the real estate, and that was another facade. So we've been living in this grand illusion of an economy that's not an economy. It's not a free market economy. It's not equilibrium. It's not separation of powers. It's not the integrity of law. It's none of that. It's corruption, and there's a face to it, and there's details, but for whatever reason, I am the only guy that has the full story. I'm the only guy willing to go the distance, and I'm asking for your support. If you want to, turn the table upside down, if you want to live in a country of, by, and for the people, if you want the system to work the way it's designed, if you want the law to work, if you want there to be equilibrium, this is connected to everything. It is central. It's the tumor. We have to purge corruption if we're going to get a country of, by, and for the people back on behalf of the American dream. Onwards and upwards.